The evening had fallen quietly over the small town of Riverbend. The sun had already slipped behind the gray clouds, leaving behind a cold, tired sky. The air smelled of rain and car oil, and the streets were mostly empty except for a few people hurrying home. Daniel, a mechanic in his late 30s, had just closed his small repair shop. His hands were still rough with grease, and his old jacket carried the scent of gasoline. He wasn't a man of many words, but people in town knew him as kind and reliable. That night, Daniel decided to stop by the convenience store near the highway. He needed some milk and a sandwich for dinner. His house was quiet, too quiet since he lived alone, so he liked to stop by places that had a little noise, a bit of life. As he parked his truck, he noticed the streetlights flickering weakly against the misty air. The world looked tired, just like him. Inside the store, a radio played a slow country song while the cashier scrolled through her phone. Daniel grabbed his usual items, a carton of milk, a turkey sandwich, and a small chocolate bar he always told himself he didn't need. He smiled politely at the cashier, paid, and stepped back into the cold. That's when he saw her. Next to the dumpster behind the store, something small moved. At first, Daniel thought it was a stray cat. But as he walked closer, he saw it was a little girl, thin, pale, and trembling. Her knees were pulled to her chest and she was holding an empty cereal box like it was a treasure. For a moment, Daniel froze. He didn't know what to do. Children didn't just sit behind dumpsters at night. He took a few careful steps forward. "Hey there," he said gently, trying not to startle her. "You okay?" The girl looked up. Her eyes were wide and tired, her face smudged with dirt. She didn't answer. She looked scared, not the kind of scared that comes from strangers, but the kind that comes from hunger and exhaustion. Daniel crouched down so he wouldn't look so tall. "My name's Daniel," he said softly. "Are you lost?" She shook her head slowly, then looked down again. Her hair was tangled, and her small hands clutched the cereal box so tightly that it bent in the middle. He could see her lips were dry and pale. "Are you hungry?" he asked. This time she nodded. Just once. Without another word, Daniel opened the sandwich he'd bought and offered it to her. The girl hesitated for a moment, glancing at him like she was making sure it was safe. Then she took it and ate fast, so fast that Daniel had to tell her to slow down. She didn't listen. She was starving. He watched her quietly. She must have been 6, maybe 7. Her clothes were thin, a light pink sweater with a hole in the sleeve, leggings that were too short and shoes that looked worn out. She didn't have a jacket, and the night was getting colder by the minute. When she finished the sandwich, Daniel asked, "What's your name?" "Lila," she said in a tiny voice. It was the first time he'd heard her speak. "That's a pretty name," Daniel replied, smiling a little. "Do you know where your mom or dad are?" She looked away and didn't answer. Her silence said more than words could. Daniel's heart sank. He stood up slowly, pulling off his jacket and draping it around her shoulders. She was so light he could feel the cold air through her bones. "Come on," he said softly. "Let's get you somewhere warm." The girl didn't move at first. She looked unsure, maybe even afraid. But Daniel's voice was calm, and after a few seconds, she stood up and followed him. He opened the truck door and helped her climb in. She sat quietly, her feet barely touching the floor. Inside the diner down the road, the warm air smelled like coffee and pancakes. The waitress, an older woman named Marjorie, gave Daniel a curious look when she saw him walk in with the little girl. "Evenin', Daniel," she said, raising an eyebrow. "Who's this sweetheart?" "This is Lila," he said. "She was sitting outside by herself. Thought I'd get her something warm to eat." Marjorie's expression softened immediately. She led them to a corner booth and handed Lila a menu, though the child seemed more interested in the smell of food than the pictures. Daniel ordered soup and hot chocolate for her, and a cup of coffee for himself. While they waited, he tried to ask more questions. "Do you live nearby, Lila? Maybe I can help you get home." Lila looked down at the table, tracing the edge of a napkin with her finger. "I don't know. she whispered. You don't know where home is? Daniel asked gently. She shook her head again. When the food came, she ate as if she hadn't eaten in days. Marjorie watched from behind the counter, her eyes full of quiet concern. Daniel told her he'd call someone from child services in the morning. For now, he just wanted to make sure the girl was safe. After dinner, Daniel drove her back to his small house. It was a simple one-story home with faded blue walls and an old porch swing that squeaked in the wind. Inside, it was warm and tidy. Lila followed him in silently, looking around as if stepping into another world. Daniel found a clean towel and some warm clothes that used to belong to his niece years ago. He helped Lila wash up, gave her a soft blanket, and let her sleep on the small couch in the guest room. Before turning off the light, he asked, "You okay now?" She nodded sleepily, her eyes half closed. "Good night, Lila," he said. As Daniel walked back to his own room, he couldn't stop thinking about her. Where had she come from? Why was she alone? And how long had she been out there, hungry and cold? He lay awake for hours, listening to the soft wind outside and the faint sound of Lila breathing in the next room. The next morning, the sun peeked weakly through the curtains. Daniel went to check on Lila and found her sitting at the kitchen table, swinging her legs and staring at a bowl of cereal he'd poured for her. She smiled shyly when he entered. "Sleep okay?" he asked. She nodded. "It's warm here," she said softly. Daniel smiled. "That's good to hear." As they ate breakfast, Lila began to talk more, small bits and pieces. She said she used to live in another town but didn't remember where. She mentioned a mom who went to find work and never came back one day. The details were fuzzy and Daniel didn't want to push her too hard. Later that morning, he called social services. The woman on the phone sounded sympathetic but tired. "We're short on staff," she said. "Can you keep her for the night? Someone will come by tomorrow." Daniel agreed. He didn't like the thought of sending her back out anyway. That day, he took her to the park near the lake. She laughed for the first time, chasing pigeons and kicking leaves. Daniel found himself smiling too. He hadn't realized how empty his days had been until now. By evening, Lila had drawn pictures on scrap paper and asked if she could stay just one more night. Daniel told her yes, though he knew things couldn't stay this way forever. Still, something deep inside told him that meeting her wasn't an accident. That night, as he stood by the window watching the moonlight fall across the yard, Daniel whispered to himself, "We'll figure this out, kid." Lila slept soundly, wrapped in a soft blanket, a faint smile on her face. For the first time in a long while, Daniel's house didn't feel lonely anymore. It felt like a home. He didn't know it yet, but this small act of kindness, stopping to help a hungry little girl, would change his life forever. The next morning came softly, with pale sunlight touching the curtains in Daniel's small kitchen. The smell of toast and scrambled eggs filled the air. Lila sat at the table wearing one of Daniel's niece's old sweaters, which was a little too big but warm and soft. Her small hands wrapped around a cup of warm milk, and her eyes followed the steam rising from it. Daniel moved quietly around the kitchen, not wanting to startle her. He was still trying to figure out what to do. He had called social services again that morning, but the woman he spoke to told him the same thing. They were short-staffed and couldn't send anyone until the next day. He could almost hear the tiredness in her voice. So once again, it was just Daniel and Lila. When he sat down across from her, Lila looked up with a shy smile. "Thank you," she said softly. Daniel smiled back. "You're welcome, kiddo. You feeling better?" She nodded. "It's warm here, and the food's good." He chuckled a little. "Well, that's something I'm glad to hear. You can stay until we figure things out, all right?" Lila nodded again and returned to eating. She was quiet, but there was something peaceful about her silence now. After breakfast, Daniel decided to take her to the park again. The air outside was cool but bright, and the grass still sparkled with morning dew. Lila ran ahead, laughing as she chased after a yellow butterfly. Daniel watched from the bench, smiling. It had been years since he'd heard that kind of laughter, light, pure, and full of life. A woman walking her dog stopped nearby. "She's adorable," she said to Daniel. Your daughter? Daniel paused, unsure what to say. No, just helping her out, he replied with a small shrug. The woman smiled kindly. Well, she seems happy. You're doing something good. Her words stayed with him long after she left. Doing something good. It didn't feel heroic, it felt natural. Still, the thought of Lila going back to wherever she had come from filled him with quiet worry. Later that afternoon, they stopped by a small thrift store. Daniel bought her a coat, some better shoes, and a small stuffed bunny that she held close to her chest all the way home. You didn't have to buy me this, she said softly. I know, he replied, smiling. But you looked like you needed a friend. That made her giggle, a sound Daniel hadn't heard in a long time. It reminded him of his younger sister who had passed away years ago. Maybe that was why he felt so protective of Lila. She reminded him of the family he used to have. As the day went on, Daniel noticed small things about her. She hummed while drawing. She liked her sandwiches cut diagonally, not straight across. She said thank you every time he gave her something. And at night before bed she would whisper, "Good night, Mr. Daniel," in a sleepy little voice that made his heart melt. That night, Daniel sat in his living room after putting her to bed. The old clock on the wall ticked slowly and the TV played quietly in the background. He wasn't watching, though. His mind was full of questions. Who was Lila's mother? Where was she now? Was someone out there looking for her? Daniel wasn't the kind of man who liked getting involved in other people's lives. He had always kept to himself, fixing cars, paying his bills, minding his own business. But now, for the first time in years, he felt responsible for someone else. And not just responsible, he cared. Deeply. The next morning, he got a call from social services again. The same woman apologized and said they were still backed up. We can send someone by later this week, she said. Later this week? Daniel repeated, frowning. I'm sorry, sir. There's just too many cases right now. He looked over at Lila, who was sitting on the floor playing with her stuffed bunny. She looked happy, safe. He didn't have the heart to tell her she might have to leave soon. It's all right, he said finally. I'll take care of her until then. Days passed. Daniel fell into a routine. Breakfast together, walks in the park, trips to the store. At night, they watched cartoons or old movies. Lila started drawing pictures for him. Simple crayon sketches of flowers, houses, and sometimes a tall man with brown hair standing beside a small girl. That's us, she told him one evening, proudly holding up the paper. Daniel smiled and nodded. Yeah, it sure looks like us. He taped the picture to the refrigerator door. The more time he spent with her, the more he noticed the changes in her. The dark circles under her eyes faded. She laughed more. She ate heartily. She even started singing to herself sometimes when she played outside. The house felt different now. Warmer, brighter, more alive. But beneath all that joy, Daniel knew this couldn't last forever. He wasn't her family. He didn't know her full story. And sooner or later someone would come for her. One evening, as they sat watching the rain fall outside, Lila turned to him and asked, Mr. Daniel, do you think my mom will find me? The question caught him off guard. I don't know, sweetheart, he said gently, but I'm sure she's thinking about you. Lila looked down at her bunny. She said she'd come back, she whispered. But she didn't. Daniel's chest tightened. Maybe she's trying, he said softly. Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, but it doesn't mean they don't care. Lila nodded quietly as if trying to believe him. Later that night, after she fell asleep, Daniel sat by the window again. The rain tapped softly against the glass, and he thought about his own life. The years he had spent alone after his sister's passing, the silence of his house, and the way he had stopped expecting surprises. And now here she was, a little girl who had appeared out of nowhere, changing everything. He thought about calling the local police to file a report, but something held him back. He wanted to protect her. Maybe he was afraid that once the system got involved, she'd be taken far away, and he'd never see her again. The next few days were peaceful. They baked cookies together, though Lila got more flour on herself than in the bowl. They planted a few flowers in the backyard, and Lila named them after cartoon characters. Every evening, Daniel read to her before bed, old children's books his niece had left behind years ago. She would fall asleep halfway through, her bunny tucked under her arm, and Daniel would quietly close the book and whisper, "Good night, kiddo." It was during those quiet moments that he realized something. He needed her as much as she needed him. She had filled the empty spaces in his life without even trying. A few more days passed and still no word from social services. Daniel began to think that maybe he could handle this, at least for a while. Lila was safe, fed, and cared for, and that was all that mattered. But deep down he knew something was coming. Life had a way of changing just when things started to feel right. One chilly morning, Lila was drawing by the window when Daniel heard a knock at the door. It wasn't the mailman and it wasn't a neighbor. The sound was firm, like someone who knew exactly why they were there. Daniel wiped his hands on a towel and went to open the door. Standing there was a woman with tired eyes, messy hair, and a faded coat. Her face looked familiar in a way that made his heart skip a beat. "Can I help you?" Daniel asked carefully. The woman took a shaky breath. "I'm looking for my daughter," she said softly. "Her name is Lila." Daniel stood frozen for a moment, the cool air from the open door brushing against his face. The woman standing there looked exhausted, her hair tangled, her cheeks pale, and her coat worn thin. But behind those tired eyes there was something familiar. Before Daniel could speak, Lila's small voice broke the silence. "Mom?" Daniel turned quickly. Lila stood by the window, her eyes wide with surprise. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then she ran forward and wrapped her arms around the woman's waist. The woman let out a shaky breath and knelt down, hugging her daughter tightly. "Oh, Lila," she whispered, tears filling her eyes. "I was so scared. I didn't know if I'd ever see you again." Daniel stepped back quietly, giving them space. He could feel a wave of relief for Lila. She wasn't alone anymore. Her mother had come. After a few minutes, the woman stood and looked at him properly. "You must be the man who found her," she said softly. "Yes," Daniel replied. "I found her behind the store a few nights ago. She was hungry and alone. I didn't know who to call, so I kept her here until someone came." The woman nodded, brushing a tear from her cheek. "Thank you. You have no idea what this means to me." Her voice trembled slightly. She seemed nervous, glancing around the small living room. Lila held her mother's hand tightly, smiling up at her. "I'm just glad she's safe," Daniel said, meaning every word. "Would you like to come in? You both look like you could use something warm to drink." The woman hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "That would be nice. Thank you." Inside, Daniel poured some tea while Lila showed her mother the drawings she had made during the past few days. "Look, Mom, Mr. Daniel bought me a coat and a bunny, and we went to the park," she said, her voice full of excitement. Her mother smiled, though Daniel noticed how her hands shook as she lifted the cup of tea. "I'm glad you were kind to her," she said quietly. "I was looking everywhere. I thought—" She paused, swallowing hard. "I thought I'd lost her for good." Daniel sat across from her. "I'm sure it must have been hard. Do you live nearby?" She hesitated again, her eyes flickering toward the window. "Not really. We've been moving around a lot. Things have been complicated." There was something in her tone that made Daniel uneasy. It wasn't just exhaustion, it was guilt. She looked like someone carrying a heavy secret. Lila climbed into her mother's lap and hugged her again. "Can we go home now?" she asked softly. Her mother looked at Daniel before answering. "Yes, baby. We'll go soon." Daniel nodded slowly. He didn't want to question her too much. It wasn't his place after all. But as he watched her sip her tea with trembling fingers, he couldn't ignore the small details. The way her eyes darted around the room, the faint smell of alcohol on her coat, the nervous tapping of her foot. Still, he said nothing. After a while, she stood up. "Thank you for everything," she said politely. "You did more for my daughter than most people would." "It was no trouble," Daniel said. "She's a wonderful kid." The woman smiled faintly. "She is. She really is." As she took Lila's hand and headed toward the door, Daniel felt a strange tightness in his chest. Something about the moment didn't feel right. It wasn't just sadness, but it was worry. "Wait," he said suddenly. "Do you need a ride somewhere?" "It's late," she shook her head quickly. "No, thank you. We'll be fine." And then they were gone, walking down the quiet street, Lila clutching her mother's hand, her small coat fluttering in the wind. Daniel stood by the window long after they disappeared. He told himself he had done the right thing. The girl was back with her mother. That was what mattered. But still, something deep inside wouldn't let him rest. That night, he couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the look in the woman's eyes. Not relief, but something else. something that looked a lot like fear. The next morning, Daniel got up early and made himself coffee, though he barely touched it. The house felt strangely empty again without Lila's laughter. He missed the sound of her footsteps running down the hall, her little humming as she drew pictures at the kitchen table. He told himself it was silly to worry. Maybe they were fine. Maybe she had a place to stay. Maybe everything would work out. But by evening, when the sun began to set behind the trees, there was another knock on his door. Daniel's heart jumped. When he opened it, he was shocked to see the same woman standing there again. Only this time she looked different. Her eyes were red from crying and her hands were shaking even more. "Can I come in?" she asked quietly. "Of course," Daniel said, stepping aside. "Where's Lila?" "She's with a friend," the woman said quickly. "Please, I just need to talk." Daniel led her inside and she sank onto the couch, clutching her hands together. For a long time she didn't speak. The room was silent except for the ticking of the clock. Finally she whispered, "I didn't tell you the truth." Daniel frowned. "What do you mean?" She took a deep breath. "My name is Mara. Lila is my daughter, yes, but I haven't been able to take care of her the way she deserves." She looked down, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I made mistakes, bad ones. I was trying to find work, but things got worse. I thought I could fix it before she noticed, but I couldn't." Daniel said nothing. He just listened, his heart heavy. "I've been trying to get help," Mara continued, her voice breaking. "But every time I start over, something goes wrong. And Lila, she deserves more than this. She deserves a home where she feels safe. You gave her that. You did what I couldn't." Daniel leaned forward. "You're her mother. You still have time to make things right." She shook her head slowly. "You don't understand. I've tried. I really have. But I keep failing." Her hands trembled as she looked up at him. "When I came yesterday, I just wanted to take her away because I was afraid you'd judge me. But when I saw her, happy, clean, laughing, I realized she doesn't need me to fix her life. She needs someone who already knows how to give her what I can't." Daniel stared at her, unsure what to say. Then she whispered something that made his chest tighten. "I want you to keep her." He blinked. "What?" "I want you to take care of her," Mara said, tears streaming down her face. "Adopt her. Be her family. I know it sounds strange, but I can see how she looks at you, how safe she feels here." I can't do it anymore." Daniel's mind spun. The words didn't make sense. Just days ago she had been begging for her daughter back, and now she wanted to leave her behind. "Mara," he said gently, "you're tired. You've been through a lot. Maybe you just need some time to rest, think." She shook her head. "No, I've thought about it for months. I just didn't know how to do it until now." Her voice cracked as she stood. "Please don't call anyone yet. Just promise me you'll keep her safe if I can't come back." Daniel looked at her, this broken, desperate woman who loved her daughter but didn't believe she was enough. He wanted to argue, to fix it somehow, but before he could speak she turned toward the door. "Mara," he said softly. "Where are you going?" She paused, her hand on the doorknob. "I don't know yet," she said quietly. "But wherever I go, I'll think of her, just promise me she'll be okay." And then she was gone, leaving Daniel standing in the middle of the quiet house. The same house that had once felt lonely, then full and now felt confusingly empty again. He sat down, his thoughts swirling. He didn't know what would happen next. All he knew was that a little girl had brought light into his life, and her mother's return had brought questions he never expected to face. Outside, the wind rustled softly through the trees, carrying the faint sound of a child's laughter, or maybe just the echo of it fading into the night. That night felt unusually quiet. The sound of the clock ticking in the living room seemed louder than usual. Daniel sat on the couch staring at the spot where Mara had been sitting just hours earlier. Her words kept echoing in his mind. "I want you to keep her." Those 6 words played over and over like a whisper that refused to fade. He didn't understand how a mother could say something like that, not coldly but with love. It was clear Mara cared about her daughter, but it was also clear that she was lost, worn down by life and full of regret. Outside, the wind blew softly through the trees. Daniel leaned back, rubbing his temples. He thought about Lila, her smile, her laughter, the way she had started humming when she was happy. He couldn't imagine her being taken away again, not after everything that had happened. But what was he supposed to do? He wasn't her father. He was just a man who had happened to stop at the right place at the right time. Hours passed and sleep never came. He sat by the window until the first light of morning touched the horizon. The next day, Daniel drove into town. He stopped by the diner, hoping a cup of coffee might clear his mind. Marjorie, the waitress who always seemed to notice when something was wrong, came by with a knowing look. "You look like you've been up all night," she said, setting down his cup. Daniel smiled weakly. "Something like that." She poured more coffee. "This about that little girl you were taking care of?" Daniel looked up in surprise. "How did you know?" Marjorie chuckled softly. "Honey, word travels fast in this town. Don't worry, nobody's judging you. Folks around here know you've got a good heart." Daniel sighed. Her mother came back. "Well, that's good, isn't it?" "I thought so," Daniel said. "But last night she came again and asked me to keep the girl." Marjorie stopped wiping the counter and stared. "You're joking." "I wish I was." The waitress shook her head slowly. "Sounds like that poor woman's at the end of her rope." "What are you going to do?" Daniel stared into his cup. "I don't know yet." When he returned home, the house felt emptier than ever. The small drawing still hung on the fridge. The stuffed bunny sat neatly on the couch where Lila had left it. He picked it up and sighed, wondering if he'd ever see her again. But that evening, as the sun dipped low, there was another knock on the door. His heart jumped. He already knew who it was. When he opened the door, Mara stood there again. This time her eyes were red but steady. She looked tired but calmer than before, as if she had made a decision she couldn't turn back from. "Daniel," she said softly. "I'm sorry to come again. I needed to talk." "Of course," he said, stepping aside. "Come in." Mara walked in slowly, holding her purse close to her chest. "Lila's with a neighbor," she said. "She's safe," Daniel nodded. "That's good." They sat down, and for a moment silence filled the room. Finally, Mara spoke. "I've been trying to change. I really have. But every time I take a step forward, I fall back again. I thought I could give Lila the life she deserves, but I keep failing. And she's the one who suffers." Daniel listened quietly. Her words were heavy but honest. "She needs someone steady," Mara continued. "Someone who can give her what I can't, a home, a normal life." "I've seen how she looks at you, Daniel. She trusts you." Daniel shook his head. "Mara, I'm not sure I'm the right person. I don't know how to raise a child. I work long hours. I live alone." You already did," she interrupted gently. "For days you took care of her when no one else did. You didn't have to, but you did anyway. That means something." Daniel looked away. "It's not that simple." Mara's eyes filled with tears. "I know, but I can't keep her with me right now. I don't have a job. I don't even have a place to stay next week. I can't feed her the way she needs." "I'm not asking you to replace me. I'm asking you to help her live." Daniel sat back, his chest tight. "What are you really asking me, Mara?" She took a deep breath and said quietly, "I want you to adopt her. Not right away, and I know it's a big thing. But if something happens to me, I want her to have a real home. I want her to have you." For a long time, Daniel didn't speak. The words felt too big, too heavy to respond to. He thought about his small house, the quiet nights, and how everything had changed since Lila arrived. He thought about how she had brought laughter back into his life, how she made him see the world in color again. But adoption, that was something he had never imagined. "Mara," he said softly, "this is your daughter. She loves you. Maybe you just need time to get back on your feet." "You can do that," Mara smiled sadly. "I hope so. But I don't want her to suffer while I try to fix myself." Tears rolled down her cheeks and she brushed them away quickly. "You're good, Daniel. I could tell the first time I saw you with her. She felt safe with you. And that's something she's never had before." Daniel felt his throat tighten. "If I say yes, what happens next?" "I'll go to the authorities," she said quietly. "I'll tell them everything, that I can't care for her right now and that I want you to have temporary custody. If later I can get better and prove I'm stable, maybe things can change. But for now I just want her somewhere safe." Daniel rubbed the back of his neck. "You're sure about this?" She nodded slowly. "Yes, it's the hardest thing I've ever done, but it's what's right." For the next hour, they sat and talked about Lila's favorite foods, her bedtime routine, how she liked her milk warm with a little honey. Mara's voice shook every now and then, but she kept going, determined to make sure Daniel knew everything. By the time the clock struck 9, the air felt heavy with unspoken emotions. Mara stood to leave. "I'll come tomorrow with her things," she said softly. "Please don't tell her yet." "I'll explain it to her myself." Daniel nodded slowly. "All right." Before she left, Mara turned at the door. "Thank you, Daniel. You didn't just save her that night. You saved me too. You reminded me that there are still good people in this world." After she left, Daniel sat in silence. The night outside was calm, but his thoughts were anything but. He felt the weight of what she had asked, not as a burden, but as something sacred, something real. He thought of Lila's drawings on the fridge, her laughter echoing through the small house, and her tiny hand in his as they crossed the street together. Somewhere in his heart he knew the answer. The next morning, Daniel stood by the kitchen window, watching the sunlight stretch across the yard. He imagined Lila running through it, her hair glowing like gold in the light. Maybe this was what life had been preparing him for, not just to fix cars, but to fix something broken in another person's world. When the knock came later that day, Daniel didn't hesitate. He opened the door to find Mara standing there, holding a small bag and Lila's hand. Lila smiled brightly. "Mr. Daniel," she said, running up to hug him. "Mom said I can stay here for a while." Daniel looked at Mara, who gave him a faint, tearful nod. He knelt down and hugged Lila tightly. "That sounds pretty good to me," he said, forcing a smile through the lump in his throat. As the sun shone gently through the doorway, Daniel realized that sometimes life doesn't wait for perfect timing or plans. Sometimes it just puts two hearts together, one that needs love, and one that's been waiting to give it. And in that quiet, golden moment, Daniel understood what Mara's request truly meant. It wasn't a burden. It was a gift, the most unexpected, beautiful gift of all. The morning was peaceful, filled with the sound of birds outside and the smell of pancakes in the kitchen. The sun gently touched the walls, making the small house feel brighter than ever. Lila sat at the table, swinging her legs happily while coloring with her crayons. Her small hands moved quickly across the page, filling it with shapes and bright colors. Daniel stood by the stove, flipping pancakes and smiling quietly to himself. It had been a few weeks since Mara had left Lila in his care. Each day still felt new and strange, but also full of life in a way he hadn't known for years. The silence that used to fill the house had been replaced with laughter, questions, and small feet running across the floor. "Mr. Daniel," Lila said, holding up her drawing. "Look, it's us." He turned around and smiled. The picture showed a man, a little girl, and a house with flowers in front of it. The man had messy hair and the girl had a big smile. "You did a great job, kiddo," he said, hanging the drawing on the fridge beside her other pictures. Lila grinned proudly. "Do you think my mom will like it when she sees it?" Daniel paused. "I think she'll love it," he said softly. "You're very good at making people smile." Every now and then Mara would call. She was in a program to help her get better and find steady work. Her voice always sounded tired but hopeful. She never stayed on the phone long, but she always asked, "Is Lila okay?" And Daniel always said, "She's doing great." At first, Daniel wasn't sure how to handle everything, the paperwork, the questions from social services, and the new responsibilities that came with caring for a child. But somehow things started to fall into place. He learned how to pack school lunches, read bedtime stories, and fix tiny ponytails that never stayed neat for long. Lila brought new color into his life. She taught him patience, laughter, and the joy of small things, like baking cookies on rainy days, or catching fireflies in the backyard when the sun went down. One evening, after Lila had gone to bed, Daniel sat outside on the porch. The stars sparkled above and the air was cool. He thought about how quickly things had changed. Just a few months ago, he had been living a quiet, predictable life. Now every day was full of surprises and love. Still, there was one thing he couldn't stop thinking about. What would happen when Mara was ready to come back? Would Lila go home? Would she forget him? He didn't want to think of losing her, but he also wanted what was best for her. Deep down, he knew that meant supporting whatever helped her family heal, even if it meant letting go. A few weeks later, Daniel received a letter. It was from Mara. The envelope was neatly written, and when he opened it, a small folded note fell out. "Dear Daniel, I wanted to thank you again for everything you've done for Lila. She sounds so happy when I talk to her. I'm in a better place now. I've found work and a place to stay. I'm still working hard every day to get stronger. But I wanted you to know that I haven't forgotten my promise. You've been more than kind. You gave my daughter safety, warmth, and love when I couldn't. You showed me what it means to be brave. I don't know what the future will bring, but I do know this. No matter where life takes us, you'll always be part of our family. With gratitude, Mara. Daniel read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and placed it in the drawer beside his chair. It brought tears to his eyes, not of sadness, but of quiet peace. He knew Mara was trying, and that meant everything. That weekend, he and Lila went to the park. The day was bright, full of families and laughter. Lila ran ahead, her hair shining in the sunlight. She waved from the top of the slide. "Watch me, Mr. Daniel," she called. "I'm watching," he shouted back with a grin. As he sat on the bench watching her play, he thought about how much she'd grown. She was stronger now, happier, and more confident. It amazed him how love and care could change a child's world so quickly. When Lila ran back out of breath but smiling, she sat beside him and handed him a small dandelion she had picked. "You can make a wish," she said seriously. He looked at the tiny flower and smiled. "What should I wish for?" She tilted her head thoughtfully. "For good things. Always good things," he laughed softly. "That's a pretty good wish." He closed his eyes for a moment, holding the dandelion gently, and made a wish, one that was simple but full of meaning. May she always feel safe and loved, no matter where life takes her. That evening, back home, Daniel helped Lila with her homework and made her favorite dinner, spaghetti with extra cheese. They watched an old movie after, and Lila fell asleep halfway through, her head resting on his shoulder. Daniel carried her to her bed and tucked her in, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Good night, Lila," he whispered. "Sweet dreams." He stood there for a moment, looking at her small, peaceful face. She had changed his life completely. Before her, his days had been quiet and plain. But now every morning brought something new. Laughter, questions, little moments that made everything worthwhile. Weeks turned into months, and Daniel and Lila became inseparable. They cooked breakfast together, built snowmen when winter came, and spent weekends reading books or visiting the nearby lake. Every time the phone rang and it was Mara, Lila would light up. She loved hearing her mother's voice, and Daniel made sure those calls always ended with smiles. One spring morning, Daniel received another letter, this time from the social worker. The message was short but important. Mara had officially requested that Daniel be given legal guardianship of Lila until she was ready to take full responsibility again. Daniel sat down and let out a long breath. He didn't know whether to cry or smile. It was official now, Lila was staying. For however long it might be, she was his responsibility, and in his heart, she was already his family. That evening, when he told Lila the news, her face lit up. "Does that mean I can stay with you forever?" she asked. Daniel smiled gently. "It means you'll stay here for as long as you need to, sweetheart. And you'll always have a place with me." She threw her arms around his neck, whispering, "You're the best, Mr. Daniel." He hugged her tightly, his eyes glistening. "No, kiddo. You're the best thing that ever happened to me." Months later, Daniel received another letter, this time from Mara again. She was doing well. She had finished her program, found steady work, and was slowly rebuilding her life. The letter was full of warmth and hope. She wrote about how thankful she was to Daniel for giving Lila the childhood she couldn't, and she ended it with a simple line that made him smile. "You didn't just save my daughter. You helped me find myself again." Daniel placed the letter in the same drawer as the first one. That night he sat on the porch again, watching Lila chase fireflies in the yard. She laughed and twirled, her little hands reaching toward the glowing lights. He thought about how everything had started. A simple act of kindness on a cold night, a sandwich given to a hungry little girl. He never expected it to lead to this, a bond that felt stronger than blood. Sometimes life didn't need grand plans or perfect timing. Sometimes it only needed a good heart and the courage to care. As Lila ran up to him holding a glowing jar full of tiny fireflies, Daniel smiled. "You caught them all," he said. She nodded proudly. "They're beautiful, aren't they?" He looked at the jar, at her bright smile, and then at the stars above. "They sure are," he said quietly. "So are you." That night, as he tucked her into bed, he realized something important. He hadn't just changed her life. She had changed his too, and though the road ahead was still uncertain, one thing was clear. Love, no matter how unexpected, had the power to make everything right again.